My name is Luis. I was born and raised in Guadalajara, Jalisco, in a neighborhood where the smell of freshly baked tortillas mingled with the incense of the processions. My grandmother, Doña Carmen, was one of those women who never missed Mass at the cathedral and who cried when they saw the Rose of Guadalupe as if they were stories from our own family. She always told me that one day I would be a different kind of priest, a warrior of God. I believed it, but today I know I was just naive. The trip to Rome was endless. I left Guadalajara International Airport with a backpack full of dreams and a rosary that Doña Carmen placed around my neck before we left. I remember that on the flight I spent hours reading a little book about Saint Juan Diego as if that would protect me from the world. I arrived at the Vatican in April 2005. A few weeks after the death of Pope John Paul II, everyone was mourning, but inside the Vatican the atmosphere was different. It wasn't sadness, it was a silence that oppressed the chest, as if everyone was hiding something. When I crossed the gates of the seminary, I knew something wasn't right. The walls were so white they reflected the sun, but the hallways seemed to swallow every sound. Every step I took sounded like a lonely echo in a cave, and in that instant I wished I was back in Doña Carmen's little shop serving fresh water. It was then that I met Father Augusto. He appeared as if out of nowhere with a wide smile and a look that, I now understand, wasn't kind. He was wearing his cassock immaculately and greeted me as if he'd known me all his life. "Luis, right? From the moment I read your file, I knew you would be special." He placed his hand on my shoulder, squeezing firmly. I didn't know whether to feel flattered or uncomfortable. He led me to the dining room, where other young seminarians were eating lunch in complete silence. No one looked up from their plates. I asked if it was always like this, and Father Augusto chuckled. "Here, ears are more dangerous than eyes, son." That phrase pierced my mind for the rest of the day. Later, in the library, I saw her. Sister Irene was a tiny nun with a restless gaze, as if she were carrying a secret about to burst out. When our eyes met, she immediately looked away, but something in her expression told me it wasn't shyness, it was fear. That night, lying in the tiny bed in my room, I couldn't sleep. The stone walls of the Vatican are cold, but what chilled me the most was the silence in the hallways. A silence that wasn't empty, but expectant, as if the place were breathing, as if something was waiting for me. The next day, at breakfast, Father Augusto sat next to me. He spoke to me about the importance of obedience, of blind faith, but each sentence ended with a crooked smile, as if he were warning me of something I didn't yet understand. "Luis, here you will see beyond common faith. Here the truth is deeper." I didn't know how to respond, but those words remained etched in my mind. In the afternoon, we were taken on a guided tour of St. Peter's Basilica. While the guides talked about the marbles and Michelangelo's sculptures, I couldn't take my eyes off the Swiss guards. Their colorful outfits contrasted with their serious faces, as if they knew perfectly well what was hidden behind those walls. That same night, Sister Irene passed by the dormitory hallway. She was carrying a stack of books, but she dropped one right in front of me. When I bent down to help her, she whispered, "Here, silence is protection, but sometimes screaming inside is the only way to survive." Before I could ask her what she meant, she hurried away. Little by little, I began to notice strange details. Doors that hadn't appeared on the plans. The Vatican, shelves that moved slightly as if hiding something behind them. The most disturbing thing was that every time I approached one of those places, Father Augusto appeared out of nowhere with his usual smile. The nights became even more disturbing. It wasn't just the silence, it was a presence. Sometimes I swore I saw shadows passing under the doors. Other times, the reflections in the windows seemed distorted, as if someone else were watching me from the other side. One morning, I heard singing. It was a Latin hymn, but backward. I looked out the window and saw a group of priests walking in a circle, holding black candles, muttering something I couldn't understand. That wasn't a mass, it was something else. The next day I tried to discuss it with one of the seminarians. His reaction was immediate. Panic. "You didn't see anything. You know nothing. If you want to keep breathing, be quiet," he told me, his eyes wide open. I realized that everyone there knew and preferred to remain silent. That afternoon, Father Augusto placed me in the Room of Tears, a private room where popes dress after being elected. There was no reason for us to be there, but he acted as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "Luis, do you think true faith is born from sacrifice?" he asked me without looking me in the eyes. I tried to tell him that faith was born from love, but he interrupted me with a dry laugh. "Here, love is a luxury, and luxuries are paid for with blood." I felt a shiver run down my spine. As I returned to the bedroom, Irene crossed my path again. This time she handed me a crumpled piece of paper, whispering in my ear. "If you want to get out of here alive, listen to the whispers, not the screams." On the paper was only a symbol, an eye inside a circle. That night I didn't close my eyes, and it was while lying there, staring at the stone ceiling, that I realized I had entered a game much older and darker than I had ever imagined. I wasn't a chosen one, I was only a pawn, and the game was just beginning. On the third day inside the Vatican, the air was already unbreathable, not because of the place, but because of the constant feeling that something or someone was watching my every step. The seminarians' lowered gazes, the prolonged silences, the half-spoken sentences. It was like living inside a theater where everyone knew the ending, except me. It was a hot afternoon. Outside in Rome, the bustle of tourists continued as if nothing had happened. But inside the Vatican Apostolic Library, the atmosphere was different. The silence was heavy, and the smell of old paper mixed with wax gave me a headache. I was helping Sister Irene arrange some books when I noticed something strange at the back of the room. One of the shelves wasn't aligned with the others. As I approached, I saw a small crack letting in a glimmer of light. I surreptitiously ran my hand along the edge of the wood and felt a mechanism. My heart began to pound. I don't know if it was curiosity, carelessness, or fate, but I pressed the panel. With a dull creak, the shelf slowly slid open, revealing an opening behind it. A spiral staircase descended into the bowels of the Vatican. The air escaping through the gap was cold, thick, laden with a musty smell and something else, something I couldn't identify, but which made my stomach churn. I turned to look at Sister Irene, but she pretended not to have seen anything. Without thinking twice, I began to descend. Each step creaked beneath my feet, as if the Vatican itself were trying to warn me. As I descended, the ringing in my ears increased. A constant murmur, as if someone were praying backward. I reached a narrow, stone corridor, lit dimly by torches that flickered erratically. Shadows danced on the walls, forming figures that seemed to move of their own accord. In the distance, I began to hear voices. They weren't prayers, but a chant in Latin, but spoken backward, distorted, as if mocking every sacred word. I slipped along the corridor, close to the wall, and when I reached the end, I hid behind a column. What I saw stopped me in my tracks. A group of priests, all in black cassocks, were kneeling in a circle, drawing symbols with a reddish powder on the floor. In the center, there was an empty space, but the feeling that something was occupying that place was undeniable. I wanted to back away, to run away, but before I could move, a hand landed on my shoulder. I froze. Interesting, isn't it? Father Augusto's voice echoed behind me. I turned slowly. He was smiling, but that smile was different. It was the smile of someone who had just caught his prey. Not everyone has the courage to descend these stairs, Luis. That makes you special. His words were gentle, as if he were congratulating me on having discovered a great secret. I tried. I wanted to apologize, to say I was lost, but he interrupted me. Don't lie, son. Lying has no place down here. He placed his arm around my shoulders in an almost fatherly gesture and began walking with me toward the exit as if nothing were happening. As we walked, the voices of the priests continued intoning that dark chant, completely ignoring us. That indifference was worse than any threat. When we returned to the library, everything was the same. Sister Irene continued arranging books, but when our eyes met, I realized she knew exactly what had happened. Her eyes reflected terror, but also resignation, as if she had seen many people come down those stairs before me. The rest of the afternoon was a torment. I tried to continue with my activities, but my mind couldn't get away from that image. That night, when I returned to the bedroom, I found a note under my pillow. I recognized Irene's shaky handwriting. "The doors you opened never close again. Guard your soul." I didn't sleep. I sat up in bed staring at the bedroom door, convinced that at any moment they would come back for me. The Vatican wasn't the holy place I thought it was. It was a labyrinth of secrets, and I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. But the worst hadn't yet begun. The next morning, when I woke up, I wasn't the same. Something inside me had broken the night before. The image of those priests kneeling, drawing forbidden symbols, wouldn't leave me alone. But what disturbed me most was Father Augusto's attitude, as if all this were normal. I knew something worse was coming. I felt it in my bones. During breakfast, Father Augusto approached me. His usual smile had disappeared. This time his face was serious, almost solemn. "Luis, today you will take your first real step. Today you will stop being a spectator." I didn't ask anything. My voice was caught in my throat. The rest of the day was a martyrdom. Every step inside the Vatican was like carrying invisible chains. Irene avoided me, but before dinner, she came over, slipped me a small piece of paper, and left. He only said, "Get ready, it won't be a ritual, it will be an offering." That night I was summoned to the Chapel of Tears. When I arrived, the atmosphere was different. The lit candles gave no light, they only projected long, misshapen shadows. The main altar was covered with a black cloak. I felt a chill run through my body. Father Augusto appeared wearing a different cassock. It was black, but the edges were embroidered with symbols I had never seen before. In his hands, he carried a small wooden case carved with figures that looked like entangled snakes. "Today you will learn the truth, Luis, not the truth they teach in pulpits, the truth that bleeds." His voice was soft, but each word weighed like a slab. He led me to a hidden door behind the altar. As we crossed it, a narrow corridor led us to a small circular room. The air inside was thick, humidity permeated the stone walls, and in the center of the room, a dark wooden crucifix hung upside down. Around it, 4 hooded figures murmured prayers in a language it wasn't Latin. It was something older, more primitive. Father Augusto opened the wooden case. Inside, a small, curved-bladed dagger with symbols engraved along the edge was handed to me without a word. My hands trembled. "To serve the truth, you must first break the veil of the flesh," he whispered to me. I was instructed to kneel before the inverted crucifix. The figures began to chant louder. It was a guttural, vibrant chant that seemed to shake the air. I raised the dagger, feeling its weight, and held it to the palm of my left hand. I closed my eyes, hoping that at least this action would give me the courage I lacked. The blade cut through the skin easily. Blood flowed instantly, hot and thick. Father Augusto gestured for me to draw on the ground. The symbol I brought, without knowing how, was the same one on the paper Irene had given me, an eye inside a circle. As soon as I finished drawing it, a frigid wind swept through the room, extinguishing the torches. Only the reddish light of a circle remained, which began to ignite on the floor, as if fire itself were springing from the depths of the earth. The hooded figures raised their heads, and their faces were not human. Their eyes were like glowing embers. Their mouths smiled with jaws that should not exist. "Luis," I heard my name, but it was not spoken by anyone present. It was a deep, distant voice, but it echoed inside my skull. I looked around, searching for the source, but there was no one there. That voice came from somewhere else, from another plane. Father Augusto leaned close to my ear. "He watches you. He accepts you." At that moment, the floor began to tremble slightly, as if something beneath our feet was trying to surface. Suddenly, Sister Irene burst into the room. Her face was as pale as candle wax. In her hands, she held a crumpled piece of paper. She didn't come closer, just reached out and dropped the paper to the floor before disappearing into the shadows. The chanting ceased. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I picked up the paper with my bloody hands. The message was clear, written in trembling letters. They don't want your soul. They want your body on the altar. I tried to stand up, but Father Augusto stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. His smile was serene, as if it were all part of a daily ritual. Don't be afraid, Louise. The truth is painful at first, but then it liberates. His fingers dug into my shoulder tightly, immobilizing me. The hooded figures began to chant a different chant, a deeper, deeper one. The heat in the room increased even though there was no visible fire. The stone floor seemed to pulse as if alive. My vision blurred, and the ringing in my ears turned into a constant roar. I felt like I might faint, but something inside me resisted. I clenched the dagger in my hand, feeling the pain as a way to anchor me to reality. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but my body was trapped. As the ritual reached its climax, Father Augusto leaned over once more and whispered, "The first step has been taken. Now we'll see if you're ready to walk the rest of the way." And with that, he helped me up, as if we had just finished a simple welcoming ceremony. That night in my room, with my hand still bleeding, I understood that the true prison wasn't the Vatican walls, it was the pact that had just been sealed, and that pact was now in my blood. After that ritual, the world was never the same for me again. The Vatican continued with its routine, masses, processions, excited tourists taking photos. But for me, every shadow carried weight, every silence was laden with whispers. Reality had been riven, and I was trapped between the visible and the hidden. The next day, as I walked through the corridors leading to the chapel, I heard my name. It wasn't a common knock, it was a raspy whisper, as if someone were dragging it along the walls. "Louise," I stopped dead in my tracks, turning around from side to side, but there was no one there, only the echo of that voice that wasn't human. During the Mass, I sat in the back, trying to go unnoticed. I tried to concentrate, to pray like I did in the Guadalajara Cathedral with my grandmother. But something wouldn't let me. The stained glass windows, once majestic, began to distort. The images of saints and angels seemed to twist. Their serene faces turned into grimaces of pain. Their wings turned black. But the worst was when the priest raised his head. His eyes turned completely black, empty, as if for a moment he had ceased to be human. And yet, the faithful applauded and sang without noticing anything. I felt trapped in a nightmare where everyone was asleep except me. When the Mass ended, I tried to leave quickly, but an elderly monk crossed my path. He grabbed my arm with tremendous strength, leaning close to my ear. "Louise, you're one of us now." Her breath smelled of sulfur and her eyes glowed red for a moment before she let go of me. People passed by us as if nothing had happened. I left the chapel almost running, my heart pounding. In one of the hallways, Sister Irene intercepted me and pulled me into a side room. She locked the door and stood silently listening. "They've already marked you, Louise. From the ritual, the whispers are only the beginning. If you don't leave, they'll soon be screaming inside you." Her words chilled me. I asked her how I could escape, what I should do, but she just handed me a rosary of old, worn wooden beads. "This won't save you. But it will remind you of who you were before they touched you." At that moment, sharp knocks echoed on the door. They weren't normal knocks, they were like deformed fists, as if the walls themselves were trying to break. Irene placed her finger on my lips, asking for absolute silence. From the other side, I heard shuffling, slow footsteps, as if a swarm of shadows were patrolling the hallway. My breathing was so heavy I felt like I was giving myself away. When the noise faded, Irene unlocked the door and pushed me through. "Run to the library, that's where they least like to go." I obeyed without thinking. I ran through the halls like a fugitive, dodging monks who looked like living statues, with empty eyes and smiles that weren't human. When I reached the library, I hid among the bookshelves. The silence was suffocating, but the whispers continued. Now inside my head, right? Louise, Louise, they called me like a hypnotic chant that tried to break my sanity. I gripped the rosary tightly, feeling the beads dig into my fingers. That's when I saw Father Mashers, an old man known for his kindness and wisdom. But what I saw that afternoon wasn't him. He walked among the shelves, but his skin seemed to melt, as if his face were wax exposed to fire. His lips murmured prayers, but his smile was that of a satisfied demon. I ducked behind a piece of furniture, but Mashers passed by me and whispered, "The truth burns, doesn't it, Louise?" Without pausing, without even turning around, as if speaking to the air, but I knew it was for me. The rest of the day was hell. I moved from corner to corner, dodging shadows, avoiding the reflections of the stained glass windows that now seemed to stare at me mockingly. Father Augusto didn't appear, but his presence was felt in every corner like a weight on my chest. That night, in the bedroom, the real terror began. When I turned off the light, the reflection in the window didn't reveal my face. What I saw was a version of myself, kneeling, dressed in a black cloak, while deformed hands crowned me with thorns. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but the image was still there. It was as if the reflection was showing me the future they had already decided for me. I got up, but the cold was so cold that my feet stuck to the floor. I felt the room breathe, the walls whisper my name. That early morning I realized it was no longer about rituals or black masses. It was an invasion. They were inside me, feeding on my fear, molding me in their image. The game was over. Now it was a war for my soul. The next morning was different. The Vatican was quieter than usual. It wasn't the usual silence, it was a thick silence, as if the air knew that something would break that night. I felt it on my skin. That sensation of something invisible walking behind me, brushing against the back of my neck. During breakfast, Father Augusto sat across from me. This time there was no smile or joke in his tone. He just looked at me, boring his eyes into mine. "Louise, tonight you will see the true face of faith. Don't be scared. The truth is never pretty." After saying that, he continued eating as if he had just invited me to some random event. The day passed slowly, as if time were mocking my anxiety. Every minute weighed on my shoulders. Irene didn't appear all day. I felt alone, trapped. And the worst part was that I no longer knew if I wanted to resist or if I was being slowly dragged towards something inevitable. When the sun set, Father Augusto looked for me. We walked in silence through corridors I hadn't walked before. We went down hidden staircases, through doors that seemed to have not been opened in centuries. The air was heavy, humid, with that same smell of burnt wax and something else, something rotten. Finally, we arrived at an immense room hidden behind the main altar of St. Peter's Basilica. It was a place that never appeared on plans, a space that shouldn't exist. The walls were covered by red curtains, and in the center, a circle of blue fire burned smokelessly. Around the circle were gathered cardinals, bishops, and men in suits I recognized as diplomats. Men who on television had appeared as paragons of virtue. That they stood, waiting. The ceiling lights went out. The blue fire was the only illumination. A low, guttural chant began with words in a language neither Latin nor human. The heat increased, but it wasn't physical. It was as if something inside me began to boil. The fire in the circle grew suddenly, forming a kind of vortex. The entire room trembled, and then Lucifer arrived. I can't describe him as a man with horns and a tail. No. He was a gigantic figure with a body sculpted in pale marble, black wings that brushed the curtains, and eyes. Those eyes were pits of fire, living embers that pierced my soul. He didn't speak. He didn't open his mouth, but his voice echoed inside my mind. Louise only spoke my name, but it was enough to make me feel like my head was going to explode. I fell to my knees, panting, as my body shook uncontrollably. The cardinals and bishops knelt, striking their foreheads against the ground as they repeated, "Glory to the bearer of light." Their voices were monotonous, like a learned prayer without emotion, but the echo rang in my ears. Lucifer extended one of his hands toward me. He didn't touch me, but I felt his energy envelop me. It was as if something invisible was marking my skin from within, imprinting a seal on my soul. It wasn't just physical pain, it was a fire that burned my will, my identity. Father Augusto approached me and whispered, "He is granting you vision, Luis, after today. You will never see again with the eyes of the blind." I wanted to scream, I wanted to flee, but it was useless. I was trapped in that circle, in that ceremony that had been perfected for centuries. The chants grew louder, the walls seemed to expand and contract as if the Vatican breathed to the rhythm of that ritual. I was kneeling, sweating, feeling each word spoken by them pierce me like needles. The figure of Lucifer did not fade. He stayed there watching me, feeding on my brokenness. He did not offer me riches, he did not tempt me with promises, he only showed me reality. I was a vessel, a tool. When the blue fire was extinguished, darkness reigned for a few seconds, and in that instant I knew something had changed. Not outside, but inside me. Father Augusto lifted me from the ground gently, as if we had just finished an initiation ceremony. "Now you carry the mark. Welcome to the Royal Church, Luis." His words echoed in my ear like a verdict. We left that room through another hidden passageway. I walked like a zombie, feeling every heavy muscle, every contaminated thought. I had become what they wanted, but deep down, a spark of rebellion ignited. I knew what I had experienced wasn't a dream, it was humanity's greatest farce. And although I was marked, I still breathed, and as long as I breathed, I could fight. I don't remember how I got to my room after that ceremony. My mind was shattered, my body was just a shell. I lay down, but I didn't sleep, I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those burning eyes of Lucifer etched in my mind. The mark was inside me. I felt it. At dawn, under my bedroom door, I found a folded piece of paper. I recognized Sister Irene's handwriting. It read only, "Today you will know the truth. Library, don't miss it." My heart was pounding like crazy, but something inside me knew I could no longer run away from that truth. The apostolic library was empty, as if time had stopped there. Irene was waiting for me at the back, next to the bookshelf where I had found the secret entrance days before. But this time she showed me another door, a narrower one, camouflaged in the stone, as if it were part of the wall. "Tourists don't see this, Luis. They keep the biggest lies in history here." Her voice was barely a whisper, but each word echoed inside me. We descended a damp stone staircase. The smell of old paper, mixed with rust and the stench of rotten meat, made me nauseous. When we reached the back, a hallway led us to a huge room. There were no windows, only iron shelves that formed a labyrinth of documents. "Welcome to the Vatican's secret archives." Irene handed me a pair of cloth gloves. "Down here, even the dust can kill you." I didn't know if she meant it or if it was a metaphor, but I put them on without question. We walked through narrow aisles, flanked by books with symbols I'd never seen before. Irene stopped in front of a shelf and pulled out a dark leather-bound volume with a black wax seal. She placed it on a stone table and opened it slowly. What I saw took my breath away. They were detailed records of pacts. Pacts signed by popes, cardinals, and important figures in the church throughout the centuries. Names I'd heard at masses in my childhood, glorified as saints, were there, stamped alongside demonic symbols. The miracles you saw on television, the tears of statues, the instant healings, many of these were negotiations. Luis, one of the narrators, turned the pages with a calmness that contrasted with the terror that ate away at me. I found handwritten letters in which high-ranking officials requested favors from dark entities in exchange for power, influence, and manipulation. Descriptions of rituals disguised as ecclesiastical ceremonies. Details of how each televised mass was actually a spectacle to channel energy toward the true altar, that of the adversary. In a corner of the room, Irene showed me a different shelf. There were no books, but metal boxes engraved with symbols. Inside were desecrated sacred objects. Inverted crucifixes, chalices with demonic inscriptions, reliquaries contaminated with ritual blood. It was a collection of blasphemies carefully kept under lock and key, away from the eyes of the world. But what shocked me most was an ancient parchment sealed with red wax. When I opened it, I found a list of names. My name was there. They had already chosen you before you arrived, Louise. You didn't seek the truth. The truth sought you out. Irene looked at me with compassionate eyes, but I only felt rage, helplessness. My body was trembling. I wanted to scream, to break everything. But Father Augusto appeared at that moment, emerging from the shadows as if he had always been there. The curious live short, son, but the brave, they have a special place in our flock. His tone was sweet, as if he were speaking of an everyday topic. He approached the documents, caressing the covers with long, pale fingers. Now you understand why God remains silent. No, not because he has abandoned mankind, but because man sold his altar. His words were poison coated with honey. Irene tried to confront him. She yelled that all this was a crime, an abomination, but Augusto only smiled. The sin was giving free will. We only bring order to chaos. He looked at me directly. His gaze was an abyss. Louise, you are now a part of it. The pact was sealed that night. Now all that's left is for you to embrace your role or suffer. My fists clenched in rage, but his presence paralyzed me. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew the net was closing. I was trapped, and the worst part was that it wasn't because of physical bars anymore, it was because of the mark inside me. Augusto walked away with tranquility as his voice echoed through the halls. Faith doesn't fear the truth, she said, but you still fear it. That makes you human and therefore useful. Irene peed on my arm and pulled me toward a side passage. You can still run away, but there is no such thing as running away without consequences. I knew she was right. The battle was just beginning. As we ran, I realized that the Vatican wasn't the heart of the faith, it was a portal, a silent battlefield where souls were merchandise, and I was next on the list. That night I knew there was no turning back. After seeing the secret archives, after hearing Augusto's words, I understood that my only option was to flee. I didn't know how or where, but to stay would be to damn my soul. Irene led me through the oldest corridors of the Vatican, those where not even the security cameras worked. We walked quickly, but without making any noise, like two thieves who knew they would be caught at any moment. Louise, the guards are not men, they are something worse. They are the hands that spread hell within these walls. Her voice was low, but each word pierced my heart. I felt like time was running out, that they were allowing us to advance only to enjoy the hunt. Reaching a narrow passage, we began to descend a spiral staircase. The air grew thicker with each step, as if descending into a bottomless pit. Suddenly, Irene stopped and pulled me against the wall. Listen, what I heard made my blood run cold. It was the sound of bare feet dragging on the marble. It wasn't a normal walk, it was a slow step, as if each movement scraped the stones. Then I saw them. Hooded figures, dressed in black robes, were advancing down the corridor, but their faces weren't human. The shadows they cast were deformed. Their eyes were two red dots glowing in the darkness. And worse, they didn't walk at random. They sniffed the air as if they could smell my fear. They're the guards, Irene whispered, her fingers digging into my arm. If they see you, no prayer will save you. She signaled me to back away, but as we turned, another group of guards appeared from the side corridor. They had closed in on us. The shuffling footsteps and the whispers in reversed Latin grew louder. The candles that lit the corridors began to go out one by one. Darkness enveloped us, and the only thing visible were our red eyes, floating like live embers. Irene pulled a small glass vial of holy water from her habit. Without hesitation, she threw it on the ground in front of the guards. The effect was immediate. An inhuman, heartbreaking scream filled the tunnel. The figures writhed, retreating for a few seconds. "Run, Louise!" she shouted, pushing me with all her might. Strength. My legs moved instinctively, beyond fear. I ran without looking back, knowing she remained as a shield. I traversed the stone corridors, feeling the walls close in on me. The torches flickered as if the Vatican itself were mocking my attempt to escape. But Irene's voice, shouting my name, urged me on. I reached the Chapel of Tears, the same one where it had all begun days before. I closed the doors behind me, barricading them with pews and lamps. I knelt, panting, my heart about to burst. The silence didn't last long. Dry knocks began to echo on the wood. They weren't human knocks, they were slow, rhythmic attacks, as if trying to break not only the door, but my will. Irene arrived seconds later, closing the other entrance. Her face was sweaty, but her eyes still shone with determination. "They can't get in here so easily. This place still holds a glimpse of the sacred." We knelt together in front of the altar. Voices began to be heard behind the door. They weren't shouts, they were whispers, prayers in reverse, spoken in a tone that chilled the blood. "Louise, give us what is ours," they said. Over and over again. Irene began to pray in Latin, but it wasn't the solemn Latin of the masses. It was an ancient, almost forgotten prayer. I tried to follow it, but my lips trembled. Then, without understanding how, I knelt and prayed, not with pretty words, not with learned formulas. I cried out to God in my mind. I begged him to hear me, even if it was for the last time. Suddenly, a golden light illuminated El Crucifio del altar. It was